Delivering a successful marathon requires mastering the fine art of preparation. And today, we're digging into how one of the country's top pro teams is preparing to run fast at the marathon distance later this month in the Arizona desert. Welcome in. This is Inside the Marathon Project, the podcast that takes you inside the stories of the athletes, organizers, and dreamers behind this one-of-a-kind marathon experience. I'm your host, Steve Sievert, and excitement is building. As we record this episode, we're just a little over 2 weeks out from race day. The gun sounds for the elite age groupers in the Gold Wave December 20th. The pros are going to toe the line the very next day. And we've had the opportunity to talk with a number of those pros as part of our podcast series leading up to race weekend. Today, though, a little bit of a pivot. We're going to talk about preparing with a coach and get a coach's perspective on all things marathon. Our guest today is HOKA NAZ elite coach Jack Mullaney. And joining us, well, it's a guy who sort of knows him pretty well because he hired him. NAZ elite co-founder Ben Rosario, and of course also the co-founder and CEO of the Marathon Project. Jack, it is great to meet you. Thanks for spending some time to join us on the show today.
Likewise. Thanks so much for having me.
And Ben, you've been a busy man. You've got a lot of stuff underway as we prepare for marathon weekend. How you feeling about things for December 20th and 21st?
Yeah, feeling really good, Steve. Really, really good. We've had so much momentum over the last couple of weeks with the HOKA sponsorship being announced and the fields coming out and some of the perks that the athletes are getting from HOKA, like Rocket X3s for all the gold waivers, which was really cool. And it was fun to see the reaction to that. And then the privateer project that they're doing where some of the unsponsored athletes in the pro race can get kitted out that day and get shoes and get bonuses. And yeah, I mean, everything they've done is awesome. And that only, amplified what we've already been doing and what we're doing with Blanks, one of our other big sponsors, sponsoring the personal bottles program for all the athletes, amateur and pro alike. So yeah, I mean, the list goes on, but it's been a really fun couple of weeks. The momentum is really good. And now it's, crunch time.
And Jack, you've got a couple of athletes who are getting ready to toe the line in Chandler later this month. We're going to dive into that as part of this discussion for sure. But I want to get to know you a little bit better, have our audience get to know you a little bit better. What was your entry point into running, and what are some of your earliest memories of being involved in the sport?
I think I'm a bit of a unique case in terms of how I found the sport because I never raced high school or college track and cross country. I actually found the sport by accident. I was an ultimate Frisbee player in high school, and my senior year, we played the defending state champions, which was Hopkins High School in Minnesota, which has produced plenty of good distance runners, but they also were a very good ultimate Frisbee team. And in my infinite wisdom as an 18-year-old, after we had a particularly difficult match, decided that I was going to go for a run to get my feelings out. I was frustrated with the way that I played. I was frustrated with the way that our team played. And I thought, well, there's not really a constructive way to go about solving that in the moment when you're just feeling really emotional. So I went for a run, and, you get that endorphin rush that comes with a good endurance run. And it really kind of ignited a passion for me in trying to see how far I could push myself, how far I could go. And that was my senior year of high school. So I went to college and continued to run on my own and started running marathons, which isn't really anything I'd recommend someone do. But when you don't know what you don't know and you're just getting into the sport, you're just trying to embrace it however you find it. And I think because I was able to find the sport on my own terms, that's really something that I'm cognizant of in my coaching philosophy. And recognizing that, environment and how an athlete feels about what they're doing is so important. And so I really try to build strong relationships with the athletes that I have, so it doesn't feel like, a situation where it's a dictatorship or, it feels like a chore every single day. And so that was sort of my foray into the sport. And then when I graduated from college, I had a short stint as a financial analyst because I studied finance in school. But running once again called me back, and I went back and was a director of operations intern for the track team at the University of Minnesota. And that led to a full-time job as the full-time director of operations for track and field at Utah State University. And then I was an assistant coach at the University of Portland, where I learned a lot from Rob Connor, who's one of my mentors and someone who has been really influential in my career. And then ultimately that led to NAZ Elite 2 years ago.
A bit of an unconventional path. I'm not hearing too many runners starting with ultimate frisbee. So was there something that you had to do as you were moving along in your coaching career to convince those who were hiring you that you've got enough background, you've got enough pedigree in the sport to be able to be a leader of men and women?
Yeah, I actually see my background and the way that I got into the sport as an advantage. I think there's obviously pros and cons to it. But something that was kind of omnipresent for me was that I didn't have that athlete experience. And so it ignited this curiosity and kind of this chip on my shoulder to learn as much as I possibly could. So I was the guy that would show up, early and stay late. Try to read as much as I could from training books, try to connect with coaches that I really admired and try to learn from them as much as I could. And just try to be a sponge and really be curious. And I think that curiosity really allowed me to kind of take the next steps in this profession. So that was really big, I think.
Who were some of your inspirations from a coaching perspective that you learned and absorbed from?
Well, I think one of them is on the screen right now. I learned a lot from Ben. I think one of the unique opportunities I had at the University of Portland when I got there was we had a bunch of alumni who, when they graduated, wanted to go on and run marathons. And at the time, Rob Connor, the head coach that I worked for, he kind of said, "Hey, I don't have time to coach these guys in the marathon. Jack, why don't you try to coach them?" And so, I was coaching Emmanuel Rudolph Levis, a French guy who was 11th at the NCAA cross country championships for Portland in the marathon. I coached Jeff Thies, who was 14th at NCAA's back in 2017 when we were second as a team. And I coached Matt Welch in the marathon, who was our fourth man, I think, on that podium team in the marathon. And it really was a cool opportunity for me to kind of cut my teeth as a coach. But also I like kind of what we've already talked about. I was curious and didn't really know a whole lot about coaching the marathon. And so I needed to find some people who did. And Ben was one of those people who, because of the way that NAZ Elite was founded on this idea of sharing the journey and being really open about what they were doing, I was exposed to some of the workouts that they had done, and we had some alums from the University of Portland join the team, and I was able to make a connection with him and learn a lot from him just through phone conversations, through coming down to Flagstaff a couple of times, and learned a lot there. So he's certainly an influence for me. And then a second one would be Rob Connor, the coach that I worked for at the University of Portland. I think Rob does three things really, really well as a coach. The first is that he's authentically himself. I think a lot of times we feel like as coaches, we need to put on this hat or this act when we're a coach. And Rob is a very avid fan of the band Slayer and a huge fan of Portland wrestling memorabilia from the 1970s, which are two very niche interests. But he would talk to the team about them all the time. And a kind of a unique thing happened when your coach is kind of talking about maybe some of their unconventional interests and, expressing those things. It creates a space for athletes to feel like they can be themselves too. And that, I think, is such a critical piece of creating a practice environment where people feel comfortable, they feel at ease, and they actually look forward to going to it every single day. So that was the first thing he did. The second thing was, the more that an athlete demonstrated in investment in the team and an investment in themselves as a runner, the bigger seat at the table that they got. So he would always include some of the seniors and the upperclassmen in some of the discussions that we would have about, hey, I'm thinking about this week. What do you guys think as it relates to your schedules? And I think I really learned a lot from that in terms of kind of earning your seat at the table, so to speak. And then the third thing that Rob does, I think, almost better than anyone else is he kind of always reminds you that you're at your best when you're having fun. And we shared so many laughs in the office and so many laughs at practice and just in the vans and that sort of thing that, at the end of the day, this is running and it's hard and there's hard moments in it. But if you can find places to have fun and find the joy in it, that's what makes it sustainable, and that's what allows you to get the most out of yourself. So I'll forever be indebted to both Ben and Rob for the influence that they've had on my career.
Wow, that's tremendous. Thanks for sharing that. I've had the opportunity, I've been fortunate enough to work with a handful of coaches over my running career, and based on my experience, I think coaches are born, right? There's this coaching DNA that I've seen anyway, where they're leaders of people, they're born to teach, they're born to be supportive. Do you buy into that philosophy, and would you consider yourself someone of that ilk? Were you born to be a coach, even though you got into coaching maybe a little bit later in life?
It's an interesting question because what I would say is I was fortunate to grow up in a family where some of my cousins and extended family members were coaches, but they were coaches in basketball at the collegiate and professional levels. And I do remember from a very young age going to their games and being fixated on the sidelines, not even as much watching what's going on the court, but being really fascinated by the communication patterns that are going on from the sideline to the athletes and how somebody can have an influence on an athlete's success. So I think in the back of my mind, I always felt like coaching could be something that I would do. But what I've really come to find and what I've come to believe is coaching is really a lot about serving and it's about teaching. Especially at the collegiate level, there's a lot of teaching that goes on, but I feel like more at the professional level, it's about serving in a lot of ways because these athletes, it's their career and, they're making their livelihood off of it. And so I feel like my role is more, this analogy has been used many times, but the athlete is driving the vehicle and you're sort of like their GPS system, right? They tell you where you want to go, but you're the one that kind of maps out the route on how to get there. And, if they turn left when you turn right, it's about, hey, let's reroute. Let's figure out how to get back on track. And I think recognizing for me that you're serving the athlete has been a big piece in just recognizing what coaching is. And I don't know if that's something that you're necessarily born with as much as it is the influences of how you're raised and what you're taught to value. My values are super important to me as a coach, and those really come from my parents. But I think if you value, servanthood and serving other people, I think that you certainly can become a very good coach.
It's been a touch over 2 years since you took the helm at HOKA NAZ Elite. What was the biggest step or the biggest change that you had to make in your approach to coaching college athletes to coaching professional runners?
There's certainly quite a few. And at the same time, there's also a lot of things that stay the same. I think in a lot of ways, there were some really talented and developed athletes at the University of Portland where, if you had continued to coach them for a couple more years from a training perspective, that's just the next logical step of where you would be. So it wasn't maybe necessarily that as much as it just was learning how to navigate the professional running scene. It's a little bit different in terms of how you get into races. For example, Wesley and Alex who ran the Chicago Marathon this year, we didn't get the final confirmation that they were in the race until September 10th, which was about a month out from the race. And, we're very grateful for the opportunity that they had to be in that race. But it's just something that's a little bit different, right? The process of doing that. You don't just go on Direct Athletics and put your name in a hat and you can run the race. So there's a lot of little things, I would say, that are different, but I think maybe the biggest thing is just having, a large number of people on the team that you really truly view as individuals, because their schedules are so individual. Their training can be so individual. And when you travel as a professional coach, you're traveling with 1, 2, or 3 athletes, but then the rest of the team is back in Flagstaff still training, versus in college, when you travel, basically the whole team is traveling. So that whole operation kind of moves with you. So that presents some unique communication challenges, I would say. So that's maybe one of the biggest things. And then through all of that, where you have all of these individuals on their own individual timelines, finding overlap in training. Because we believe so deeply in the team setup and training with teammates. How can we kind of have these separate goals maybe, but that intersect within the week of training, and kind of that alchemy of being able to put those things together where you're training as a team, but you're racing individually. I would say that was probably the biggest adjustment, and it's still something that I'm getting better at as I go. But it's certainly, far better than when I started.
What were some of the aspects of what was already established with the team that you knew you wanted to keep, whether it was culture or structure or something else, and then areas where you wanted to evolve and put more of your own imprint on the team going forward?
Well, I was really fortunate in that, there was so many good things about being a part of NAZ Elite. I think just the way in which it was founded from the ground up, and all the work that Ben and Jen put in to get it to where it was, made it so that it was already a well-run operation behind the scenes. And we have a beautiful performance center here in Flagstaff that serves as kind of our home base. So from a facility standpoint, we were in a good spot. Being in Flagstaff, it's just such a great place to train. That was already really, really in place. I think if there's been any changes, it's just that, the athletes who were a part of the team when I joined, and even the staff and the personnel, they had all joined the team at different times in the timeline of NAZ Elite. And I think what was really important for me when I started was to be clear about what my values were, which for me are the values of connection. So really building strong communication patterns between myself, the athletes, and all of our support staff. Competition, valuing that as kind of our highest priority. Everything we do is around competing to be the very best we can be. Consistency, being able to show up every single day, prioritizing being a 24/7 athlete and really showing up the same way every single day. Curiosity, leading with, how can we get better? How can we grow? Continuing to ask questions. And then compassion, being a compassionate teammate, having compassion for yourself when you're going through the ups and downs. Those were my 5 values. And I think it was really important for me to be clear about those and lead with those, so that those who are a part of the organization could kind of decide, is this still a really good fit for me, or is it not? And I think over the last 2 years, we're now in a really special place where, the entire organization now is pulling in the right direction. And I think kind of stemming from those 5 values that I intend to lead with every single day.
Well, I want to switch gears a bit now to talk about the Marathon Project and get your perspective on this race. It sits in this kind of unique spot on the calendar just about 10 days before the curtain falls on the entire year. So you've got some athletes who are already in the off season. You have others who are recovering from fall marathons. From a coach's perspective, how do you see this event fitting into the landscape of marathoning in America?
Well, I actually have a story about that. Last December at this time, right around this time, I was in the Phoenix airport getting ready to get on, I think, 3 different planes to get to Valencia, Spain. And on that trip, my luggage got lost in Germany, and I was going to the store to buy clothes when I got to Valencia. And I remember texting Ben and saying, man, I would really love to just jump in my car and drive 20 minutes down the road and have this race. Because, just the inconvenience of getting to a place, like Valencia, which has kind of been anointed as this fast marathon that everybody wants to go to. It's inconvenient for someone that's training, especially in Flagstaff, Arizona. The time zone change is always a bit of a variable too. That's not, if you don't have to do all those things, go hop on a couple of different flights and deal with the jet lag and that sort of thing. If you can just get in the car and drive down to Phoenix, this is going to be way better. And I think we still have the opportunity to run on a pancake flat course, just like Valencia. We still have the opportunity to have great pacing, just like they do over there. And so I think there's a really unique opportunity for us to have a race where we're trying to go fast here in North America. It happens sometimes in Chicago, but that's about it when it comes to really fast, flat marathons here in North America. And I just think there's a really cool, unique space for the Marathon Project to kind of take that over and become a destination for the top pros, certainly in this continent, but around the world, to come here and have the opportunity to go after a fast time.
Great lead into my next question. I'm glad you brought up your experience with Valencia, because there is this ongoing debate among fans. What is better from a spectator perspective? Is it a time trial marathon where we're watching the world's best just go as fast as possible, essentially race against the clock? That always tickles me a little bit because there is still a race to be won in there. But, this time trial methodology versus a championship race like a New York, for example, that doesn't have pacers. From a coach's perspective, do you have a preference, or is it just let's line folks up when they're ready and take a crack at a starting line?
I think there's benefits to both types of races. I think there's a lot of fun that goes into preparing for a more tactical race like a Boston or New York. And certainly those races have the history and the tradition of, some great competitions over the years. It's also really fun to try to get as fit as possible and see how fast you can go. I think those are both really fun, exciting endeavors to go after. And for each athlete, wherever they're at in their career, maybe one makes more sense than the other, depending on how many marathons they've done, what their strengths and weaknesses are. But I'm really excited for Paige and Tyler, our 2 athletes, because having this type of a race really fits them both for where they're at in their careers. And I'm just really excited for them to have the opportunity.
We had Paige on one of the episodes of the podcast earlier in the series, and I know she's looking forward to this event. You said it's the right time for her to take a crack at this race. How do you look back on her year in terms of how it's evolved, given a little bit of a challenge that she had in the beginning of the year, having to not take a full effort at Ottawa? How are you assessing her chances to drop a really fast time and lower her PR coming up here in a couple of weeks?
Something that I told Paige this summer, right after Grandma's, was that for the last year or so, as she's built back after giving birth to her son Nolan, is that she's been producing world-class inputs without the confidence or the accolades that come from world-class outputs, because there's just been something that's gotten in the way. And in the spring, earlier on in the spring, it was this nagging sickness that she had, which got in the way of preparation for Ottawa. But But then once we got to grandma's, she's notoriously had struggles in the heat, and we woke up on race day, and just every single minute the humidity seemed to creep up and the temperature seemed to creep up. So it wasn't ideal situation or ideal circumstances for her to be able to put on or demonstrate the fitness that she had gained. And I'm just really excited for December because I think there's a pretty good chance the conditions are going to be good. It's one of the reasons why I really like this race. But also, I mean, people need to know who Paige Wood is because she's so fit, and she's had so many workouts and sessions where I'm like, geez, Paige, like this is phenomenal. And so I'm just excited for her to have the opportunity to put that on display and really, receive some of the accolades that she's been working hard to deserve for so long.
And you mentioned Tyler Day, your other athlete who is going to be in Chandler. This is going to be his debut. Why the timing for the debut now, and why this race in particular?
Yeah, for all the athletes who I coach on the team, I think Tyler has maybe the most unique journey in the past few years. And I hope it's, one that more people can hear all of the ups and downs that he's been through just to try to get healthy, and find some consistency in training over the last few years. But we seemingly every week or every month we're hitting firsts for him, or firsts since his first surgery, in terms of, workouts that he's hitting or mileage that he's stacking. And I think dating all the way back to his college career, it was pretty evident that he was going to be a marathoner someday. And, the conversation that I've had with a couple of our athletes, Alex Masai included a couple of years ago when he first turned to the marathon, was, if we think the marathon's going to be the best event for you in your career, as soon as we're ready, let's give it a shot. Because why wait? If you're going to be a great marathoner, let's give it a go. And Tyler's now put together enough consistency and, has enough trust in his body that we're ready to give it a shot. And I'm just excited for him to start on this marathon journey.
A couple of points on Tyler's story that I want to pull on that you just shared. How do you keep an athlete engaged, keep them motivated, and keep them positive when they're going through a situation like that, whether it's a nagging injury that they just can't get over or they're coming off of surgery? I mean, those are really difficult moments in an athlete's career. What's your go-to? I mean, I'm sure it's going to be individualized depending on the athlete and the situation, but how do you keep them in the moment, keep them positive?
Yeah, so I've talked a lot about my value of consistency and being able to show up every single day. And stemming from that, or how I teach that, is really leaning into what is within our control and what's not within our control. And so, when he's going through, a setback, it's okay, hey, let's just focus on what we can do. Let's focus on what are you able to do, whether it's cross training or whatever it may be. Let's still be excited about the small wins that we can have, because it doesn't serve us to dig a deeper hole mentally or physically when you have those kind of setbacks. And so again, it's really leaning into, hey, what can we control? And given all the constraints right now, even if today is like a 2 out of 10 in terms of circumstances, can we get 2 out of 2? And really just trying to make the most of what we have on every single given day. And to his credit, he's really leaned into that and done that. And, his 2025 has been the most running and the most consistency that he's had, dating all the way back to 2020. So some days it doesn't feel like large amounts of progress, but dating back to my finance days, it's sort of like watching the Dow Jones, right? Like every day is a little up, little down, but if you pull back, over the course of a longer period of time, it's trending in the right direction. And that's what Tyler's done this year.
Something else that I want to touch on that you mentioned, let's move you to the marathon when you're ready. Let's not wait. Let's capitalize on that readiness. How do you know when the athlete is ready?
Yeah, it's a couple of things. So first is the mental side of it. And I would preface this by saying, with every athlete that I work with, at some point they're going to have to hang up the shoes and retire. And I want them to be content and satisfied with the decisions that they've made. So it has to be something where the athlete is ready from a mental perspective, because the marathon demands so much of you in the preparation phase that if you're not all in on it, it's not going to work out. It's just plain and simple. It's not going to work out unless you're all in. From a physical perspective, there has to be enough of a training base there, enough of a work capacity there to be able to handle the volumes that are required to have success, to handle the long runs. That's certainly a big piece of it. I think you look at what someone's strengths are. Are they someone that really handles long runs well? Do they handle long tempos well? Have they been able to be consistent in their training? Certainly someone who's durable and resilient is a good candidate for the marathon. So those are some of the things that we look at. But I also, having just been at the Chicago Marathon last month, you look at some of the athletes from East Africa who are having a lot of success in the marathon. A few of them have success in the track and then make the move. But there's a lot of them that are just starting at a younger age. And we talk so much about this gap that we have between, Americans and the rest of the world in the marathon. And I think on the track, by and large, the US has really started to close that gap pretty significantly, where Americans are now in the hunt for medals on the track. But at World Marathon Majors and at the Olympics, I think we still have a little bit of a ways to go. And one of my theories is just that we don't embrace the marathon soon enough, and what it takes to be successful in the marathon soon enough. And I'm not saying that everybody should drop what they're doing and go to the marathon, but I look at someone like Alex Masai, and he's Kenyan, so he's maybe isn't as representative here, but it's a perfect case study. And he's somebody who, really thought he was going to be a 5K, 10K athlete and was going to run the 10,000 in the Olympics in 2024, because his brother was fourth in the Olympics in the 10,000 back in 2008. His sister was a world champion in the 10,000 in 2009. So he has this family history in the 10,000. And we went to run the 10 in March, and, he was on pace for 27 flat until about 8K. And then, the wheels came off. And the next day we met in our performance center, and I said, "Hey, how you doing, Alex?" And Alex said, "Well, I didn't hit my goal. I think I'd like to try the marathon." And I said, "Hey, I think that's going to be your best event. Let's give it a shot." And to his credit, he's fully embraced what it means to be a marathoner at still a fairly young age. And, in 3 marathon cycles, he's worked his way down to 204 and third place at Chicago. And so I just think if, more athletes who it makes sense for physically and for who are eager to try it from a mental perspective, if they give it a shot earlier, I think you can have enough cycles in your legs so that you're still hitting some of your best marathons at maybe a more prime age, and have a lot of success with it. So, so I'm maybe someone who's a little bit more eager for people to try it if it makes sense.
I want to ask you about another athlete. There's going to be a Wilschke on the starting line in Chandler. And no, I'm not breaking any news. It's not Adrian. It's his older brother, Nadil, is going to be on the starting line making his debut. But talking about Adrian for a minute, because obviously a huge high-profile athlete that you have on your team, record setter in terms of rewriting the record book at 5,000, 10,000 for South Africa. Speaking of that readiness and moving up maybe a little bit earlier in your career, is that something that you've talked with him about, and maybe we're seeing a marathon in his future sooner rather than later?
We've certainly had a lot of discussions. I think Adrian is a really special athlete and certainly one of the most talented and gifted athletes that I've worked with on so many fronts. I mean, physically, of course, but just how disciplined he is with his mind and how he shows up every single day is so special. And it's given him the opportunity to have a pretty wide range of events that he's good at. And, you know, when you're out there getting top 10 at the Olympics or top 10 at the World Championships in a track event, I think there's there's reason to continue to pursue that. But he also tried a half marathon for the first time this fall and debuted in 59:13, which was a South African national record. And certainly I think anytime you debut under 60 minutes in the half marathon, that's a pretty good sign of what you can do at longer distances. So we're openly discussing, what the future could look like, and certainly trying to always put him in position to have the most success. He's just maybe has a fortunate problem in that he's good at a lot of things and good at a lot of distances. So there's a lot of different directions that we can go, but it's certainly something that we've had conversations with. And I think he's worked so closely with Nadil in his preparation for the marathon project that I know it's gotten him curious, maybe for himself, to think about what that could look like someday.
Well, I want to expand the aperture a bit for a couple of questions about the broader marathon scene to get your perspective. Since the first marathon project 5 years ago, I mean, it's almost been a revolution as to what's happened in the sport when you think about the continued evolution of the super shoe phenomenon. We've got high carb loading, we've got bicarb, we've got double threshold. I don't even know if we were using the term double threshold back in 2020. I mean, so much has evolved in the sport and continues to evolve. How do you and your team stay on top of everything to make sure that you're current on trends in development that will continue to shape the sport into the future years?
I think it's why the value of curiosity is so important to me, and to continue to question, continue to try to learn, continue to try to investigate everything that comes onto the scene, whether it's, the shoe technology, it certainly allows athletes to recover faster and perhaps do a little bit more in training. And so testing the boundaries of that has certainly been a piece, whether it's, bicarb or no-meo or any of the fueling and hydration pieces. It's really doing investigative work on that, having willing athletes give it a shot for themselves, and continuing to be curious. It's talking to coaches of athletes who are having a lot of success and try to understand, maybe some of the through lines of what they're noticing. So it's really just an approach of, you have to think that you never have it figured out. That's true regardless of whether there's advances in technology or not, because you're always trying to iterate towards a more optimal plan or understanding for an athlete. But really, for us, it's just been always trying to make something a little bit better and always kind of chasing a little bit of improvement or a little bit of a better understanding, because we are in a special era and you're seeing it reflected in the performances that athletes are having. Just how many athletes in the marathon, for example, on the men's side are running now in the low, 2:00s. And on the women's side, we're starting to see some pretty crazy fast times in the 2 teens. And just trying to understand what goes into all of that and how we can maybe replicate that or identify what could be actionable for our team.
Another big bang development in the sport is the stratification of the sport, where everybody is sharing workouts online. And from an athlete and coach perspective, from an athlete and fan perspective, you can definitely see the benefit of that in terms of building community among the athlete and fan. But from a coach's perspective, is that something that you're concerned about, sharing too much so that some of the specifics about what goes on in terms of team dynamic and the team training philosophy is shared publicly?
Well, I do. I've always found it a little bit interesting that our sport brags about practice more than any other sport that I'm aware of. Like you don't ever hear a basketball player talking about how many shots they made in practice, or something along those lines. So I always find it a little bit interesting, because I feel like we're at a point now where maybe a workout is almost held up like a race performance might be in the Strava community. If someone does something impressive. But I think what's way more important is understanding the context or the space that each workout or each training segment, where it kind of fits in. I had a pretty deep background in music when I was going through school, and I think good music is a lot like good training. It's not necessarily about what specific notes that you're playing, it's the space between the notes and how those notes flow together. And training is very similar. Everyone knows, there's all these different types of workouts that you can choose, but it's way more about the space between the workouts and the flow of the workouts, that puts an athlete in position to be successful. So to cherry pick, one workout and say, hey, this is something special, is sort of like taking one note out of a great song and saying this is special. Well, not really. It's the song that's special. And so I guess I'm not as concerned about like a workout getting out there, because that's something that happens when FloTrack comes to film or whatever it is. I think what's more important to me is that my connection with the athlete is such that they understand the flow of the training. They understand the purpose of why we're hitting the workouts that we are, why there's this much rest in between and recovery in between, so that they're not tugged to kind of chase the silver bullet that they see on Strava, where it's like, oh, hey, coach, I saw athlete X doing this. Maybe we should do it. That's sort of, again, like chasing a note rather than chasing an entire song.
Great perspective to keep everything kind of in check in the bigger picture. You mentioned a moment ago the times they continue to come down. Maybe put you on the spot here a little bit, but 5 years from now, I'm going to stick with that same 5-year increment, because that was the time frame where we had the marathon project 1.0, now 5 years later 2.0. In 5 years' time, what's the world record for the men? What's the world record for women in the marathon?
Man, I don't know. I always try to stay out of the prediction business, because it's not really something that I personally have a whole lot of control over. My mind is always around what can we do on a day-to-day basis and what's our process and what's within my control. I think just from an outsider's perspective, I think we'll see those world records continue to come down. By how much, though, it's kind of like we don't really know what the next, advancement in technology is going to be. We don't know what the next advancement is in fueling and hydration. I think 10 years ago, if you would have told people about super shoes and you would have told people about whatever, bicarb, Nomeo, high carb, now that's all the craze. It's hard to always kind of see how those things shape, but if there is a truism from history, it's that we always do get better and we always do get a little bit faster. So it's going in that direction. I'm not going to put a number on it because someone's going to find this podcast 5-10 years from now and it's going to look like a silly prediction. So I'll stay out of that for now.
Fair enough. Well, I want to wrap up by asking you about a couple of other athletes who aren't racing the marathon project, but are interesting stories themselves, including Alex. So Alex Masai, as you've mentioned a couple of times here in this discussion, maybe it's flown a little bit under the radar, but my goodness, the year he has had, opening up in Houston with a PR in the half, then he goes to Rotterdam, 2:08 and change, and then he does some record setting for the team at Chicago. First time HOKA has landed on the podium at a world major. First time NAZ Elite has had an athlete on the podium in a world major. I mean, he runs 2:04:37. You mentioned earlier, after you had that conversation with him following the 10, he was ready. You saw that readiness in him. What has allowed him to move from what was a little bit of a disappointing performance, for example, at the 10, to kind of put all of the pieces together where he just dropped a huge career-defining race in Chicago?
I think the first thing about Alex that sets him apart is his ability to be consistent. It's very rare that I write an entire marathon training block and it's executed perfectly. For Alex's first, second, and third marathon builds, what I've written ahead of time might as well have been the training log. And that speaks to his ability to show up in the same way every single day and execute, but also recover really well. If you ask Alex what his life is during marathon training, he'll say, well, I run, I eat, I shower, I sleep, and repeat. And that's it. And it's very simple, very straightforward, but what he has, and I think part of this is driven by the family that he comes from. I think he's just around athletes who really are professional in everything that they do, but he understands that whole song that I was talking about. He understands when he's going into a workout what's needed for execution on that day, because he also knows what's coming next and how he needs to execute today so that he can be ready for the next one, and how he needs to recover so he can be ready for the next one. I think he does that as well as anyone that I've ever coached and worked with. So that's first. The second thing is he's not afraid of hard work. He hit, I think, 4 or 5 135-mile weeks leading into Chicago, but that's been a stair-stepping progression, right? His first marathon build, we're hitting 120 as the peak. The next one is 125 to 130. This one is 135. And part of that has just been enabled by the shoe technology, but he's also just a lot stronger and he can handle and absorb it a lot better. So he's not afraid of that. He's not afraid to get after, some really long, hard progression runs or some long, hard tempos up at 7,000 feet. So that's a piece of it. And then his race execution in these marathons has been phenomenal. So every marathon that he's run, the group that he's started with, he's essentially won that group. So in Chicago last year, he went out with a group that was on 209 pace, or 208 high pace, and by 33K, he had dropped everyone in that group and ran his way to 208.51 and a 9th place finish. Then in Rotterdam this spring, he went out with the 206.30 group, but there were 20-mile-an-hour winds in Rotterdam, and so everyone was kind of off the mark of where they would be. But he kept moving up. He was in the teens or so place-wise through halfway, and then kept making up ground every split and finished 5th and essentially won his group. He only lost to the 4 guys who were in the lead pack and ran 208.03. And then the same story happened in Chicago, where he went out in the 205 group and essentially won that group and was only behind Jacob Kiplimo and Amos Caputo, who went out with the with the leaders in that kind of 60 flat-ish through halfway group. So he's just executed really well and been really smart on race day. And so I feel like even though he ran 2:04:37 and it was super impressive, I'm not sure that we've seen how good he can be. And that's an exciting problem to have. And it's something that we're really excited about as we start to think about 2026.
I'll jump in. I've just enjoyed the conversation, but I do want to ask you about that day in Chicago from your perspective, because I always enjoyed Chicago, and it's a race where you can get around and see them in a few spots. Not as many as you can at the Marathon Project, of course, but you can see them in a few spots. I was wondering if you could just take us through that day, from your lens.
Yeah, so day started very early for me. I'm somebody who likes to run first thing when I get up in the morning as a way to kind of set the mind for the day. So I was up at 2:40 a.m. on race day morning and went for a run in the dark along Lake Michigan, and then went over to the race hotel to meet up with Wesley and Alex. And it had been an eventful night the night before because World Athletics had just approved Wesley's transfer of allegiance. So that morning was when we basically got the official word that he would be racing as an American, which was really exciting for Wesley and just a culmination of a long process for him of becoming an American citizen, and just really exciting. So we saw the two guys, and I think maybe because so much of the energy and the excitement was just around that passing, that Alex almost kind of slipped under the radar as just this, smooth operator of, being ready to go, calm, cool, and collected. But we had trained for both of those guys to go out in 2:06 pace, assuming that there would be an American record group that would go out around 2:06 and try and cut down and break the record. So that was our hope and intention going into the race. At the pacing meeting the day before, it looked like there was only going to be a 2:04 group was kind of going to be the closest group that was available. And so we had gotten a couple of coaches together and started, or at least got one of the pacers to back up to 2:05. So that was going to be the group that the guys were going to go with. I knew it was kind of on the edge of what we had prepared for, what we would feel comfortable with, but I knew that it would be much better to be with a group than it would be to be out on an island. So those guys were committed to it. And what I appreciate so much about Wesley and Alex is just how game they are to give it a shot and give it a go and not have any reservations about it. So the race started, and I walked out to about the halfway point, just a little bit past halfway. And as the group came through, they had actually merged with the 2:04 group. So 2:05 group went out a little fast. The 2:04 group, I think, had gone out really fast and then slammed on the brakes, and it allowed the 2:05 group to catch up. And so as the guys went by, they were kind of tagging off the back of that group, but looked comfortable. And I thought, all right, it's great. It's a larger group. They're all together anyways. It's fine. It was even faster than 2:05 pace. It was 62:19, I think Alex's split was. So I'm going, all right, well, we're going to be venturing into the unknown here a little bit, but they looked fine. They looked comfortable. And then from that point, you can kind of drop down a couple blocks and see them right around mile 17. And when that happened, Wesley had dropped back a little bit. He ended up having some stomach issues on the fueling end, and that's something that we're really eager to get figured out. But he had dropped off, but Alex had actually moved to the front of the group. So he had moved all the way up, and he was right up there kind of chomping at the bit. And I told him, I was standing on the side of the road. I said, hey man, you're on 2:04 pace. You're doing great, all good. And he looked at me and gave me a thumbs up. And that's when I knew it was game on. He was feeling it. He was on, he was kind of on a flyer and rolling. And so then we ran further down. There were some folks from the HOKA sports marketing team that I was with. We ran further down to a little bit past 18, kind of right around the 30K mark. And that was when Jeffrey Camelwar had kind of blew that group apart. And it was Camelwar, I think there was maybe 2 or 3 others that had decided to go with that. Daniel Obenio, I think, was one of them. And Alex and Connor Mance were a little bit behind that, but they were still moving really well and moving comfortably versus the guys in front of them that had made that move. It was sort of looking like a little bit more like the look of someone that was kicking on the last lap of a 400, where it looked a lot more strained and less sustainable. So I just tried to reassure Alex, he was still running a very comfortable, even pace. And, sure enough, they would ultimately catch those guys. But then from there, I ran to Michigan Avenue shortly past the 25-mile mark and kind of waited for the leaders to come through. And that's kind of when you have those kind of goosebump moments as a coach, because, for anyone that's never spectated at a major marathon, for one, I would say go do it at some point. It's really special. But there's something kind of majestic to the front of a major marathon, because you have all of these police cars or squad cars coming first, and they're blowing their sirens, and there's thousands of people lining the streets, to kind of get a look at what's behind these squad cars. And so the kind of the caravan of those vehicles comes through, and you see Jacob Kiplimo come through, and he looks like he's really, really hurting, but he's got such a large lead that you're going, all right, he's going to hang on. And then shortly after that, Amos Caputo came through. He looked a little bit better. And I actually give him a lot of credit. I thought he ran a great race because he was by himself for most of it, and still ran a 2:03. And then I looked further down Michigan Avenue, and you could see more squad cars coming. And that meant one thing. It meant the lead American vehicle. And so as they started to come into view, I'm looking, and you're trying to kind of peek around the vehicles to see who's running. And the first person I saw was Connor Mance. And I thought, all right, that's fine. He's next. But as the vehicles got closer, I could see that there was someone in front of Connor that was even closer to the vehicles. And that's when I saw the unmistakable stride of Alex Masai. And it's very tough to put into words what kind of a feeling that is, because it was that point that I knew he was going to do something pretty special. And they went by, and they were still kind of neck and neck, Alex and Connor were, and I just started sprinting up Michigan Avenue, and I actually went right past our camera guy, our creative director, and he said, "Man, it looked like someone had given birth. You were running so fast." And as I'm running down the street, the crowd is getting louder, and I saw Alex right before you make that right-hand turn to go up the little hill and then the left into the finish. He put in a surge that Connor didn't respond to, and that's kind of when I knew he was going to finish on the podium. And so I ran to the entrance where they let the coaches and agents and credentialed people go into the finish line, and double check the finishing results real quick, just to make sure that he was in fact third. And had a little moment for myself just for a second, and then ran over and met up with Howie Kofleski, who's Alex's agent. And it's crazy when you have someone finish on the podium at a major, they part the seas for you. And all of a sudden there I was right in the finishing tent with Alex. And I think both of us were just kind of in disbelief for the first couple minutes. He had no idea, just couldn't even comprehend that he had just run 2:04 and was third overall on the podium. But it was a really special day, and I think one that inspired a lot of people on our team. And that's, I think, as I look back on it, what I get most excited about, because now it showed everyone else on our team what's possible here at NAZ Elite. And I think Alex opened the door for some pretty special performances that we're going to have here over the next couple of years.
Can only imagine the emotion of that day. What did you do to celebrate when you got back to Flagstaff?
Well, people that know me know that I'm a pretty tame guy when it comes to celebrations. I don't drink or anything like that. So it was pretty tame. But what I do always try to do after a really good race is go for a nice long walk by myself, and I did that in Chicago the night after the race, and just reflect and be really grateful for the opportunity to work with somebody like Alex, and just kind of reflect on everything that I've learned through coaching him. And that for me was celebration in and of itself. I think as a coach, the thing that you're always kind of looking for, really excited to see, is when those athletes have special breakthrough moments. That's what just fills you with the most amount of joy, because you see them go through, the ups and the downs or the disappointments. You get to bear witness to the process. Most people only get to see kind of the last 10 pages of the story, and you get to see the whole book. And because you get to see the whole book, it makes it a lot more meaningful. And so I think for me, just kind of taking some time to reflect and be grateful is how I celebrate.
Jack, thanks for being so generous with your time and sharing your background and your insight and the stories. Fascinating discussion. I thoroughly enjoyed it. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
We are looking forward to one heck of a weekend. December 20th and 21st, it's the Marathon Project. Of course, we have the live stream on FloTrack the morning of December 21st. We're going to kick it off with the pre-race show. Scott Fauble, Molly Seidel, and myself hosting that. And then, of course, all the action from the streets around Wild Horse Pass in Chandler, Arizona. Can't wait to bring you all of the action of the Marathon Project 2.0. Until then, it's one race, one project, one pursuit. It's the Marathon Project. Talk to you again next week on Inside TMP.